For a look now at what is making news in print and online, we're joined by rural podcaster and research fellow at Deakin University, Kirsten Dioprese. Kirsten, thank you so much for joining us today. What are we seeing on the front page of the major papers today?
Hi, Steph and Emma. Great to be here. Look, I think there's no surprises here that the front pages across Australia are really dominated by the Bourbon Street tragedy. 14 people killed. And I chose the Canberra Times image because it's so iconic. If anyone has been to New Orleans, they will immediately recognise Bourbon Street. And sadly, now it's the place where 14 people have been killed. Now, the update is, of course, that the FBI no longer believes that Shamsuddin Jabbar was working with others when he drove a truck through those crowds in a terrorist attack. Initially, it was feared that perhaps he wasn't acting alone when he drove that truck. It was adorned with an ISIS flag into those New Year's revellers on Bourbon Street. So the FBI is still very much investigating this, digging into social media and interviews. There are plenty of tips that are coming through to try to understand more about that ISIS connection. So we know that Jabbar was a US citizen, born in the US, and spent years in the army, including a deployment in Afghanistan. And just before the attack, he posted videos on Facebook in which he said he had joined ISIS and that he had originally planned to harm his family and his friends. So Jabbar himself was killed in a police shootout at the scene. And at this point, there is no definitive link between the New Orleans attack and the truck explosion in Las Vegas. But again, that's still being investigated. And I know that you just had your reporter talking on it about it now. So it's still very much moving, both these big events in the US.
Yeah, certainly is continuing on. The next story you've got for us is from the Weekly Times. This is about farmers, obviously something close to your heart, preparing for this long, dry summer. Tell us more about this story.
Yeah, that's right. Look, farmers across Victoria are really preparing for a long, dry summer. I'm in the southwest of the state, and at the moment we're in harvest. So getting those crops off, we actually like it to be dry, but as hot as it is right now, much less so. So temperatures are actually likely to be above average for Victoria for January, which also means an increased chance of unusually high maximum temperatures and also minimum temperatures. And that's actually true for much of Australia. So this is not good news for the people in the Grampians region, and I live just south of where those fires rage really on Boxing Day and Christmas Day as well. That bushfire, of course, remains in the Grampians National Park, and we're in a very strange situation in that there is a bit of recovery happening, but at the same time still staying not so much an alert, but monitoring those conditions. 76,000 hectares burned. And in some towns like Moyston, it's not the first time they've been impacted by fires. So there were some really bad fires in 2006. And I know many farmers who were burnt then, their properties burned, and again, a second time. So really tough times. In better news, Blaze Aid, which is a fantastic charity, is here and setting up at the Willora football ground to help farmers rebuilding their fences and their properties. But again, it's really just monitoring those conditions. I know this weekend we are gearing up again for some hot temperatures well into their 30s. So yeah, the Weather Bureau outlook for January is not the best for what has already been a dry start to summer.
Yeah, really worrying conditions there. And Kirsten, the 9 papers today are covering an issue that we're probably going to hear quite a lot more about as we head into an election. They're talking about bulk billing failing to benefit most Australians.
That's right. The Age and Sydney Morning Herald have a really interesting story about whether we're really seeing the benefits from the Albanese government's large funding boost, which was to encourage doctors to bulk bill. So a breakdown of data from the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare shows that while children and older Australians were better off under the government's $3.5 billion investment, and they're, of course, sort of the more vulnerable group, those of us aged between 16 and 64 were not really reaping the benefits. And this large group makes up 54% of all doctors' appointments. So if we look at the data in 2022, general adult patients were getting about 80% of GP services bulk billed, and that dropped to 69% in the months that led up to October 2024. And the other place we're being hit is Medicare data shows that the average out-of-pocket payment for a doctor's appointment has risen from $43 to $47. So it's probably something many of us have actually noticed, and that is, of course, if you can get a GP appointment in rural areas and regional areas in particular, it's really hard to get a doctor's appointment. And look, I think this is something that's clearly shaping up as being a bit of a battleground ahead of the federal election, with healthcare and Medicare being one of those key issues.
Yeah, it's certainly going to be a big issue coming up. Kirsten, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it as always, and we hope you and everyone in that area stay safe.
Thank you, my pleasure.